Hi y'all, welcome to my study. Today's case is going to be all about revenge. A 50-year-old man named Marvin Heemeyer, skilled in automotive repair and welding, decided the local government screwed him over for the last time. He isolated himself away in a shed for 18 months working on a secret project. The end result of this project would be $7 million in damages as well as endangering the lives of hundreds of townspeople. This is the story of Marvin Heemeyer and his destructive creation, the Killdozer. Marvin Heemeyer was born October 28, 1951 in South Dakota. As an adult, he lived in Grand Lake, Colorado, roughly 16 miles away from the small town of Granby, Colorado, where today's story unfolds. Marvin was described by friends and neighbors as an overall friendly man who would accommodate and try to help almost anyone in need. He was seen as a hard-working, blue-collar guy, and when it came to his trade as a welder, he was described as a wizard and was immensely skilled. In 1992, Heemeyer purchased 2 acres of land for $42,000 at an auction in Granby, Colorado in order to build a muffler repair shop. He outbid a guy named Killdozer, sparking what started off as a mini rivalry between the two, which will become relevant later. In 1992, Granby had a total population of just under 1,000, making it the sort of town where everybody knew everybody. It's in this same year that Heemeyer would butt heads with some of the townspeople. To make things short and sweet, Marvin supported the idea of gambling coming to Granby where the majority of the townspeople did not. The local newspapers, Granby Sky High News and the Grand Lake Prospector, came out heavily against the idea of gambling being brought to their area. Marvin Heemeyer, upon seeing this, would bring out his own newspaper, which only had 2 articles, but it was heavily in support of gambling. This was the first event that put the townspeople and Marvin at odds. Ultimately, once Marvin saw that gambling was not coming to the area, he abandoned his newspaper and abandoned the idea entirely. At some point after purchasing the land, he was approached by the Dochev family, who offered him $250,000 for his land in order to build a concrete plant. Initially, Marvin agreed to this amount during the negotiations, but then later upped the price to $375,000. The Dochev family agreed to this new price, but after some more thinking, Heemeyer upped his asking price to a deal worth $1 million. Cody Dochev and family declined the deal after this large price hike, deeming it ridiculous, and the deal fell through entirely. This led to resentment on both sides. The way the surrounding land was zoned made it to where Heemeyer's property was in a prime location for business and was already zoned as such, whereas the surrounding land was not zoned for business and would not allow such structures to be built. The Dochevs eventually bought up land around Marvin's muffler shop and started petitioning to have the land rezoned. In 2001, the worst possible outcome for Marvin happened at a zoning commission hearing. The land adjacent to Heemeyer's muffler shop was rezoned, allowing the Dochev family to build their concrete plant next door. This concrete plant was going to be situated in such a way that it blocked main road access to Marvin's muffler shop. Needless to say, this was severely detrimental to his business. As construction began right near his muffler shop, Marvin tried appealing the zoning decision multiple times, even hiring a lawyer to help him out with it. All of these appeals were denied and nothing ever came from his appeals. He even attempted to get the Environmental Protection Agency, also known as EPA, involved, claiming the dust and pollution would harm the town. Nothing ever came of this either. Now out tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees, Marvin's trouble was only just beginning. Marvin attempted to work with the city in his own way, purchasing his own bulldozer and putting in a request to build his own road in order to restore main road access to his business. It said he was even willing to do the entirety of the work. This request was denied by the city. In the city's account of the events, there was an existing dirt road that led to his business and the concrete plant didn't block access. Looking at a map from 2007, there does seem to be access to it in a roundabout way, however not having that easy access from the main highway would definitely hurt his business. The next gripe Marvin had was over his business not being connected to the city sewer. Upon digging, Marvin's muffler shop was never connected to the sewer lines, even in 1992 upon buying the property. This had been an ongoing issue that Marvin refused to fix in the proper manner. The city offered him 2 options: either connect to the city's sewer system, which would be expensive and would have cost around $80,000 at the time, or have a septic tank put in, which was the cheaper option of the 2. Marvin ignored both of these options and instead brought a concrete mixing truck onto the property where he sunk it down into the earth a few feet. He then rigged it to where his raw sewage from his muffler business would fill up the back of the concrete truck, the big spinning mixing part, and upon filling up, he would then take a hose and drain it into various creeks and ditches. This in turn polluted the city's groundwater. After this incident, the city had enough and started slapping Marvin with big fines. They slapped him for a fine for not being properly hooked up to the sewage system, as well as having junk cars on his property. The fines totaled out to be about $2,500 to $2,600. Marvin paid these fines, but in the memo section of the check he wrote cowards. It's around this time that Cody Dochev, the concrete plant owner, approached Marvin and offered to pay $80,000 so he could have those sewage hookups completed. But it was on the condition that Marvin drop any pending lawsuits he had against him and his concrete plant. Marvin refused, and later on, all of his lawsuits would fail. In Marvin's mind, his business was going to fail as a result of the city making his life difficult. Heemeyer decided to drop his business and lease out his building to a trash company to keep a nice flow of money coming in. He later sold the building and his land in 2003. On this land near the concrete plant, there was a 6,000 square foot metal shed. The shed was also sold as it was part of the property. However, in the terms of the sale, Heemeyer had a leaseback that allowed him to use a walled off 2,000 square foot section of the shed until June 1st, 2004. To Marvin, he had lost his business and his livelihood. He was angry at all those who wronged him, that being the city, any other business owners that voted against him at the hearings, and Cody Dochev, the owner of the concrete plant. He decided to get revenge on them. He retreated to the 2,000 square foot walled off section inside the metal shed and began working on an extensive project to aid him in his revenge. Over the next 18 months, Marvin took the bulldozer that he initially bought to build the new road to his business and began making some heavy modifications. According to the audio tape, the bulldozer fit by mere inches into the garage area of his shed. He took this as a sign from God that he was destined to go through with this plan.
And this Komatsu was in excellent condition. If any Komatsu D355 should have brought 54,000, which is what I had it at, that one should have. I was willing at the auction to take 33,000 for it. Couldn't get a bid. I got a $20,000 bid. That was the only real bid we got. Well, I had 24,000 in it. I'm not going to sell it for that, especially when Ritchie Brothers says it's worth 43. So I kept the dozer. What was unique, after everything's gone, I find out that the dozer is 2 inches shorter than 12 feet and will go into the storage building. It is 1 inch narrower than the door. If I take the little bottom, the edging grousers off, or whatever they call them on the dozer blade, if I take those off, that dozer will go in my storage building. So I says, well, let's put it inside, because then I can build it to do what I am supposed to do. And I could not believe it. I put up a 4x8 piece of plywood on each side of the door so that the blade would go through, drove that thing up there, got out to where the cab was close to the door, checked the clearance, and I had 2-3 inches of clearance. I drove it right in there. It fit through that door so tight, you almost had to grease it to get it in there. Why did that particular dozer fit in the building? Why had I not bought one of the D9s at that Fresno auction? It doesn't make any sense. You know, a D9's got more horsepower. It's probably more dependable than a Komatsu. If I'd have bought one of them, I'd have never got it in that building, because they were much taller than the Komatsu was. So I'm thinking, well, this is good. I get it inside, now I can build it. Must be what I'm supposed to do.
To avoid drawing suspicion, Marvin slept during the day and worked long into the night. Steel plating was welded all around the sides of the bulldozer. In some areas, the steel alone was over a foot thick. He mixed in concrete in between the steel plating for extra reinforcement, as well as sheet metal to protect against small ballistics and explosions. Marvin outfitted the outside of the dozer with cameras that wired into the interior of the dozer and attached to 2 monitors in front of the driver's seat. This would allow Marvin to see where he was going now that all prior openings of the bulldozer had thick steel and concrete around them. The exterior cameras were protected by 3-inch bulletproof plexiglass material to ensure authorities couldn't knock out his visuals. Marvin also thought ahead and installed tanks of compressed air that would clear any dust and debris from the cameras should they get dirty. In addition, he built a fully working air conditioning system to keep the inner cabin cool. He modified the bulldozer even further by mounting 3 rifles on the front, left, and right sides with accompanying holes to fire through. On June 4, 2004, the Killdozer was fully complete and ready to go. Authorities even say Marvin greased the exterior of the dozer to prevent people from climbing on top of it easily. Marvin then got inside of the modified dozer with 2 pistols, sat down in the cabin, and pressed a remote control. This remote control controlled a homemade crane that was in the shop. This homemade crane had the heavy top half of the armor that would go on the bulldozer. Marvin knew once this was lowered, there was no way out. It was simply too heavy, and he was fully committed to his plan. I think it's interesting to insert here that the original bulldozer before modifications weighed 49 tons and had a top speed of 7 miles an hour. After all the concrete and steel was added onto it, it weighed 61 tons and was only capable of going 4 miles an hour. Still, 61-ton wrecking machine can do all kinds of damage. And with that, Marvin was off. He tore through the wall of his former business, then turned his attention to the concrete plant that had caused him so much grief in the past. Reportedly, Cody and some of his men were around the plant and watched in horror as Marvin tore into 2 of their buildings on the property. Some accounts say Marvin attempted to use one of the mounted guns to fire at Cody, but was unsuccessful in hitting him. In the middle of this attack on the concrete plant, police were called. As Marvin was destroying the concrete plant's admin office, police showed up in 3 different vehicles and idled behind a concrete barrier on the property. Seeing this, Marvin then puttered over and tried to topple over the concrete barrier onto the police cars with the police still in them. He was unsuccessful. During this, authorities used what's known as a reverse 911 call to notify and evacuate people in the town of Granby. Marvin then drove off toward the town with no realistic opposition. Townspeople heard rumbling and what sounded like thunder and peered outside to see the Killdozer slowly heading their way. Unbeknownst to them, Marvin had already destroyed an electric company building as well as a construction company's building. Marvin rammed into the town hall where many of the zoning hearings were held, causing significant damage. He then turned his attention to the library, where thankfully the children that had been inside minutes prior had been evacuated. Next up to be destroyed was a bank, then the dozer also destroyed the former mayor's house, who had since passed away and was home to his widow. More authorities arrived and were fired on by the dozer. They returned fire, with some of them even walking behind it as they fired. One of the more brazen men climbed to the top of the dozer, but as it rammed into buildings, the brick and debris that went flying caused them to jump off. During his rampage, Marvin tried to shoot some propane tanks but was unsuccessful. If he had been successful, it could have resulted in a large loss of life due to the explosions. A flash grenade was then thrown down the exhaust pipe of the dozer to no effect. None of their rifles or handguns could pierce the thick armor plating. Some people even tried blocking him in with construction equipment, but they were easily pushed aside. The Killdozer proceeded on its way, paying little attention to the 200 gunshots and explosives that couldn't penetrate its armor, all while demolishing the local newspaper office, several other buildings, and lastly the hardware store in town. The situation got so bad and the Killdozer seemed so unstoppable that the governor considered calling in Apache attack helicopters with Hellfire missiles from a nearby army base to stop the modified dozer. While demolishing the hardware store, Marvin's Killdozer got stuck in the basement of the hardware store and was unable to move. The radiator had also started to fail, causing even more issues. Additionally, the engine had also started to fail. With the Killdozer now stuck and smoking, Marvin had no way out. After roughly 2 hours and 7 minutes of the rampage, the destruction was now over. As one of the authorities were climbing onto the Killdozer, they heard a single shot. This was Marvin using one of his sidearms to end his own life. Marvin's rampage caused $7 million in damage by the end and had damaged over a dozen businesses and vehicles in town. Marvin's body was retrieved on June 5th at around 2 a.m. It took authorities many hours to get inside the Killdozer as explosives and other methods had failed, leaving only dents in the armor. They resorted to using specialized cutting torches. This still took many hours and multiple men. No loss of life besides Marvin's occurred, and while some say this was intentional, I have to disagree. He attempted to shoot large propane tanks, and had he been successful, they would have blown up in a half-mile radius, killing multiple people. Additionally, he tried firing on many members of law enforcement. The only reason he was unsuccessful in doing so is because he measured the gun ports on the inside of the tank wrong. So when he went to fire one of his rifles from the gun port, it didn't make it very far or it would strike the armor of the tank. He also destroyed multiple buildings while having no way of truly knowing who was inside. One of these included a library that just moments before held children. After these events, Marvin Heemeyer went down in history, to some as the small blue-collared guy who chose to fight back against local government and therefore was a hero, but to others, he was a crazed individual who put many lives at risk over a zoning dispute. The Killdozer was scrapped into multiple parts in 2005 in an effort to discourage collectors and is no more. If you enjoyed the video, please consider dropping a like or subscribing. It helps the video get out to more people, especially as a smaller creator. Thanks guys, I appreciate it. I'm Jeremy the Crime Historian, checking out. Peace.